Today we are going to cover how to set up GameCube and Wii emulation within Retroarch using the Dolphin core. Now before we begin, I do want to caveat that the Dolphin core in Retroarch has a ton of limitations compared to standalone Dolphin. Mostly in the controls department. You can't use the raw input directly from the GameCube controller port adapter for Wii U, you can't easily use real Wii remotes, and there is no Bluetooth pass-through, so even if you do get your Wii remotes to work, it is the buggy implementation that is just awful. Now if you don't mind using something like VJoy for your GameCube controller port adapter, it'll work fine still. You can also remap controllers or your mouse and keyboard for Wii games, so you can get a fully playable Wii experience with Retroarch, but it's just not as awesome as being able to plug in a Bluetooth adapter, sync up your Wii remote, and go to town like it is the real console. If you're not okay with those limitations, go download Standalone Dolphin. Seriously, that's what I'd honestly recommend doing still, even for those that want to use Retroarch, just use Standalone Dolphin, but if you must use Retroarch, let's continue. The first thing you're going to need is Retroarch, so if you don't already have it, head on over to retroarch.com and click on the Downloads tab. From here, scroll near to the bottom and click on Nightly Builds. Now this is a tutorial for Windows, so Windows, x86 64. Scroll down to the bottom and download retroarch.7zip. Now for whatever reason you extract that and it doesn't work and you try to run it, scroll up to the redistributable.7zip, download that, extract that, run it, you should be good to go. Now there is one more file we need to get Dolphin up and running within Retroarch, and we're going to go ahead and download that now. So if you head back to retroarch.com, there will be a little help tab here. Click on that, go to Docs, and now we're going to scroll down on this left side until we find Nintendo emulation right here, and now we're going to find GameCube right here. And there is a system folder that we need to download, so just click on this GitHub link here and it will download the needed file. Now that those files are downloaded, go ahead and get them extracted. Open up your Dolphin master folder here, go to the data folder, then go ahead and move this sys folder into your Retroarch folder, go down to System folder, and then we are going to make a new folder and name it Dolphin Emu. And then go ahead and paste that sys folder inside there. Now if you don't have this system folder, Dolphin will not run as it is supposed to, so make sure that you get this in here. Now that that folder is placed, we are ready to run Retroarch, so before you do that, make sure you have your Retroarch folder where you want to keep it before you run it. So for my demonstration purposes, I leave it on the desktop. If you want to have it somewhere else, make sure you have it there, because once you run Retroarch for the first time, it does default all of its directories into itself, so if you end up moving it later, it will be looking for the old directories and not work. If that ends up happening, just a quick example here. Ran Retroarch, it created a Retroarch config file, we're just going to go ahead and delete that, and that's how you would start over. So make sure you just have it where you want it the first time, and save yourself the hassle. Anyway, let's begin with Retroarch, so open that up. Press F on your keyboard to go to full screen mode. We're going to go to the Online Updater, Core Updater, and we're going to scroll down to the Nintendo section, and we're going to download Nintendo, GameCube, Wii, Dolphin. Once that's downloaded, go ahead and hit backspace twice to go back to your main menu. And there is a nice little glitch with the Dolphin core. It doesn't work with the default OpenGL driver within Retroarch. If you try to load your GameCube games here, the emulator will just crash. Now there are two ways to fix this problem. One of them involves going into the advanced setup options and turning off automatic video backend switcher, but if you're installing a bunch of different cores, I really don't recommend doing that. Instead, the easiest solution, and one that I would honestly recommend for Dolphin emulation anyway, is to go to your settings and change your driver for your video to Vulkan. Dolphin uses the Vulkan backend, and it is the fastest backend you can get for the emulator, so if you have a relatively modern computer, you should be able to use Vulkan. If you're trying to run this on a laptop or anything like that, change over to Direct3D 11. But now that you have that changed to Vulkan, you can go back in and load up your GameCube games, and they will run this time. And there we go. GameCube emulation up and running in Retroarch. Now, one of the best things about Dolphin is that it does auto-configure a lot of settings behind the scenes using those INI files we installed earlier, which means you won't have to do much manual setup. And with Retroarch's built-in controller auto-config, you can easily plug in PlayStation 4, Xbox One, Switch controllers, and start playing. Again, unfortunately, Retroarch does not have the best control options when it comes to Dolphin. You can only emulate the GameCube controller with GameCube games. So if you wanted to play games like Donkey Konga or Donkey Kong Jungle Beat or whatever the frick that thing's called that needs the bongos, like, you can't play that. But thankfully, most GameCube games just used the standard GameCube controller. It's just those few out there exceptions that I don't think most people are looking to play anyway. So for GameCube emulation, Retroarch works pretty okay. Unfortunately for Wii games, controls are a little less optimal. I'm trying to play Metroid Prime Trilogy here with my Xbox One controller, and default button mappings aren't too bad. But trying to control the pointer with a thumbstick is kind of weird. Now, if we go into our quick menu, you can press the guide button on your Xbox controller or the F1 key on the keyboard. You can select what type of controllers you can use on the Wii. So for Metroid Prime Trilogy, you need a Wiimote and nunchuck. Do Wiimote sideways, normal Wiimote standing up, Wiimote plus classic controller. And then you can go ahead and set the button mappings up however you like. Now for the IR pointer, if we go up to options, we can change the way that this works. So I think having it set to absolute is the better option. It tries to center it on your screen, and then you can more easily move it around. It's not going all over the place, so this is definitely the better of the two options. And again, if you really want to, you can use a mouse as your pointer as well. This is definitely the much better way to play Wii games. If mouse and keyboard would be your preferred method, you can always change the default controls in Port 1 controls. They have all of the keys you can assign here. If you don't like those default keys, you can back out to your main menu, go into settings, go to input, and then you can bind the keys yourself using your keyboard right here. There's a nice bind all option. You can run this and then set all of your keyboard keys up how you would like them to be. Now again, Standalone Dolphin does have support for real Wii remotes using a single Bluetooth adapter, and then you just need to come up with a sensor bar. And it gives you a perfectly accurate experience of using a Wii remote on a real console. Within Retroarch, you only have the emulated Wii remote stuff using Bluetooth, and again, it doesn't work right at all. So if I change this to real Wii remote, unplug my Xbox controller, and now I'm going to plug in a Dolphin bar. So Retroarch picks up the Dolphin bar just as you'd expect it to. And now I'm going to pair my Wii remote with the Dolphin bar. Alright, there we go. My Wii remote is connected to the Dolphin bar. Go back into my quick menu. We are going to go to controls. It's set to real Wii remote. Then we're going to go to options, and we're going to turn on the Bluetooth scanning. So now my Wii remote is connected. You saw in the upper left-hand corner, it's connected, but then it just keeps connecting and disconnecting, connecting, disconnecting, connecting, disconnecting, and you can never play an actual game to this. So after it finds it in the emulator, you can try to disable the continuous scan. That has worked sometimes, but again, it doesn't work like it's supposed to. And even switching between the different inputs doesn't seem to make it work any better. I've even tried changing the controller drivers here. So yeah, sometimes it does work, but a majority of the time you're gonna end up with that, and it's just not worth the hassle in my opinion. So even with the standalone Bluetooth adapter, we can get it connected, but it won't register it as a Wii remote. So again, just really not worth the time or hassle to get real Wiimote support up and running in Retroarch. Even if you could get it running again, you're going to have massive limitations. You won't be able to use the Wii Remote Plus, so you wouldn't be able to play Skyward Sword and things like that. So honestly, for GameCube games, I can see Retroarch as a great alternative to Dolphin Standalone, but for Wii, you definitely want to stick with Standalone. But that pretty much does it as far as setup of the Dolphin core is concerned. There are those limitations in the controller options, as I've mentioned numerous times and have shown you. But overall, compatibility should be on par with Standalone, and if you love RetroArch's all-in-one approach, it is a great way to add GameCube to your library. So if you were just looking on how to get basic setup done, congrats, you're all done. From here on out, we're just going to go over some of the advanced core options and how to set up a playlist for all of your games. So the first thing I'm going to do is set up the playlist. So we're going to go to the Show Desktop menu. Now that that's open, go ahead and hit OK. Right click over here, New Playlist. Type in Nintendo space GameCube with a capital C. And that gives us a nice little GameCube icon. Click on that, right click over here, Add Folder. Scroll to where your games are stored. For my demonstration purposes, they are on the desktop. Select Folder, Core, Dolphin, Database, GameCube. And there are all of my GameCube games I had in that folder. Now, I ran all of my GameCube games through the NKit compressor, so they are nkit.gcz files, so they can be picked up in Dolphin, but they're compressed, so that's why they're named weird. That program automatically renamed them. I didn't like it. I had them all nicely named before. Whatever. Now, you can also do the same for Wii. Nintendo space Wii. Then click on that, right click, Add Folder, Wii Games. Core, Dolphin, Database, Wii. Now, if you'd like to further pretty up these playlists, you can go ahead and right-click on them and download all thumbnails for this playlist. You do need to have your games named a specific way for this to work, otherwise they will not show up, and none of mine are named correctly. I already know that. So what I like to do in that case is head on over to GameFAQs, look up the game I want to get the cover art for, and they have this wonderful media section that you can click on, go to Images, and they will have box arts that are uploaded by users, and they're in pretty high quality. So I'm going to grab Rogue Squadron 2 here. Just going to save that to my desktop. And now to add that to my playlist, I'm just going to select my Rogue Leader game, and then drag the box art over here. And now Rogue Leader has its box art. And then to get these playlists to show up in RetroArch, you just have to close it down, start it back up. Now over on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll have two wonderful playlist entries for GameCube and Wii. And if you go into them, you'll have your game list. And if you select the one that has a cover art, it'll show up over on the right and looks pretty friggin' awesome. And then to run the game, you just click on it and click on Run. But now let's go over some of the core options you have within Dolphin for RetroArch. I'm using Rogue Squadron 2 as my example game here because this is the most demanding game in Dolphin practically. Only beaten really by its sequel, Rogue Squadron 3. So if you press F1 on your keyboard to go back into the RetroArch quick menu, you can scroll down to the Options tab. Now, a vast majority of this stuff you are not going to want to touch. It is set automatically by the configuration INIs. So just don't mess with a lot of this stuff. Things that are safe to mess around with, you have your internal resolution multiplier here, so you can crank this up. Do know that you will need a very strong graphics card the higher up you get. So for example, I will crank it up to 4x here, and we're doing okay. And with my GTX 1080, I have it up at 6 times now, and it still seems to be running relatively okay. So just know if you want to crank this up, you do need some graphical horsepower. Next up was that Wii Remote IR mode. If you want to mess around with the Wiimote stuff again, like we were talking about earlier, this is how you will change those. Then we have the widescreen hack. This is a way to give hacky support to widescreen to your games. So it will cause a lot of object culling along the borders, as you can see on the ground here, like that's pretty crazy. It also breaks the engine rendering on Rogue Squadron here, so by default, this hack will break a lot of games. But if you head on over to the Dolphin Wiki forums, there is a nice selection of widescreen widescreen codes that you can input that will actually run better than this hack, so you can actually get native widescreen through use of GameShark Action Replay type codes. Next up is the shader compilation mode. Now, by default, this is on synchronous, and this means anytime a new graphical effect is introduced or a texture, you'll get a slight stutter as it's saved to a cache file. Then when you replay the game, it won't happen. This is the least demanding mode, but it does cause some really noticeable hiccups, especially in more demanding games like Rogue Squadron. A couple years back, the Dolphin team did introduce Uber shaders, which helps relieve this considerably, and it will let you pre-cache all the textures. So if you don't have a very powerful graphics card, use the asynchronous Uber shaders, or just leave it on sync if you don't mind a little stutter now and then. And if you have a really good graphics card, you can turn on the synchronous, which means that it will just have everything ready to go and you should have zero stuttering. I say should. Things still happen. And then once you have that set, you can tell it to wait for shaders before it starts the game. This way it'll pre-compile those shaders to reduce stutters, and it's the best option for anyone that just wants smooth gameplay. Now, for those of you out there who don't have the best CPU, but you have a pretty good GPU, you can actually offload texture decoding to your GPU. So if you're having stuttering in games that's caused by your CPU, you can try to turn this on to see if it'll relieve some of that. Next, you can also go ahead and turn on anisotropic filtering all the way up to 16x, and you can also force texture filtering for games that don't support it. Next up, we have custom textures. So if you want to download HD texture packs from the Dolphin forums, you will use this to turn them on. Now let's go ahead and go over how to install those real quick. So I'm just going to minimize Retroarch. Now if you scroll up to your saves folder, you will have a user folder that is your Dolphin system folder here, like you would have in Standalone. So you want to go to load, textures. So these are all the custom texture packs I've downloaded for Dolphin that I use currently. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the one for Rogue Squadron 2 and copy it into my folder. And now if I go back into Rogue Squadron 2, you can go ahead and turn these on, but you will need to restart the content to get them to show up. And here it is running with the custom texture pack from General Han Solo. This is one of his older versions. But having custom textures on does make the emulation far more demanding. Whereas before I could run this at full speed, now it is stuttering every time an explosion happens. So do be aware that custom textures can have that negative impact on performance. Still looks pretty awesome though, doesn't it? So that's pretty much going to do it as far as GameCube and Wii Emulation are concerned in Retroarch. I can recommend using this for GameCube games. A lot of stuff will work, it'll work well, and setup will be pretty simple. I cannot, however, recommend this for Wii stuff unless you don't mind using only mouse and keyboard or setting up your controller to work with stuff, as it just, Wii was such an oddball. That Wii remote, like, I just can't play Wii games without the Wii remote. It just doesn't feel right in so many of them. So if your main interest is playing Wii games, I still wholeheartedly recommend getting Standalone Dolphin. But as always, thank you so much for watching these tutorials. I hope you find them helpful and are able to get your emulation setups going using them. I can't express enough gratitude to all of you for helping build this channel up. I can't do it without you, so thank you all so much. Now, if you haven't already, make sure you hit that sub button, that like-dislike button, just depending how much you like today's tutorial. And if you'd like to further help support the channel, you can always check me out on Patreon using the link in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, or checking out the join button here on YouTube. As always, I am just grateful for your consideration, and for those who have already done so, thank you so much for the insane generosity. You keep this going. I cannot thank you enough. Just thank you. You're all amazing. My friggin' champions. But that's going to do it for today, so until next time, stay awesome, and we will see you all back next video.